Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell was known for taking on the most hopeless cases, terminally ill patients that other doctors had given up on. When she and 12 patients vanished from her isolated clinic during a winter storm in 1985, colleagues assumed she had performed one final act of medical heroism. But 18 years later, demolition workers uncovered a hidden laboratory beneath the clinic that revealed Dr. Hartwell hadn't been trying to save her patients. She had been using them as test subjects for experimental procedures that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics into pure evil. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we uncover this chilling tale of medical betrayal and hidden horrors, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. Now, let's journey back to 1985, to the isolated town of Cedar Falls, where trust in medicine would be shattered forever. The last normal evening in Cedar Falls, Montana began with the weather alert crackling over the radio at 6 p.m. on January 15, 1985. Margaret Chen was listening as she sat in the waiting room of the Hartwell Medical Clinic, her hands shaking not from the cold, but from the cancer eating through her pancreas like acid. The radio warned of an unprecedented blizzard approaching from the north, winds up to 80 miles per hour, 3 feet of snow, power outages likely. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell appeared in the doorway, her white coat pristine, her smile reassuring. "Margaret, why don't you stay here tonight? With your condition and this storm coming, I'd feel better keeping you under observation." Margaret nodded gratefully. At 67, with no family left and her body failing, Dr. Hartwell's clinic had become her sanctuary. The doctor who promised miracles, who took on cases other physicians abandoned, who whispered about revolutionary treatments that could turn terminal diagnoses into medical victories. What Margaret didn't know was that she had just accepted her own death sentence. By 9 p.m., 11 other patients had been convinced to stay the night. Robert Torres, his body betrayed by ALS, couldn't make it home in good weather, much less a blizzard. Sarah Kim, the artist losing her sight to a brain tumor, trusted Dr. Hartwell's promise of experimental treatments that could save her vision. David Walsh, the young construction worker with leukemia, clung to Elizabeth's assurance that she had access to procedures unavailable anywhere else. Each patient had been carefully selected over months of planning. Each represented perfect test subjects, terminally ill, socially isolated, desperate enough to believe in miracles. Elizabeth had studied their psychological profiles like a predator, learning the habits of prey. The blizzard hit Cedar Falls like a living thing, howling and clawing at the clinic's windows. By 11 p.m., the power was out, emergency generators humming, and the roads had become impassable ribbons of snow. The clinic was now an island, cut off from the outside world. Exactly what Elizabeth needed. She made her final radio transmission at 11:47 p.m. "All patients stable. Storm passing. Will update in morning." The lie rolled off her tongue like honey, sweet and practiced. What happened next would haunt investigators for decades. Elizabeth moved through the darkened clinic like a ghost, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She carried a medical bag filled with syringes, each containing a cocktail of sedatives and paralytics. Her patients trusted her completely. When she entered their rooms claiming to administer pain medication or sleep aids, they extended their arms willingly. Margaret was first. The injection site burned for only a moment before warmth spread through her veins. But instead of sleep, came paralysis. Her muscles locked, her voice died, but her mind remained terrifyingly clear. She watched through frozen eyes as Dr. Hartwell leaned close, her compassionate mask finally slipping away to reveal something cold and predatory beneath. "Don't worry, Margaret," Elizabeth whispered, checking her pulse. "You're going to help me achieve something remarkable, something that will change medicine forever." One by one, Elizabeth systematically paralyzed her patients. They remained conscious but helpless as she wheeled them on gurneys to a freight elevator hidden behind a maintenance door. The elevator descended to a basement level that shouldn't have existed, a level Elizabeth had spent 2 years secretly excavating and constructing. The hidden laboratory below, was a testament to meticulous planning and criminal genius. Soundproof walls lined with acoustic foam, surgical tables equipped with restraints, monitoring equipment that belonged in a university research facility, not a rural clinic. Refrigeration units filled with experimental compounds, and computers programmed to track biological data in ways that violated every principle of medical ethics. Elizabeth had been preparing for this night for over 3 years, ever since her obsession with pushing medical boundaries had transformed into something darker. She had convinced herself that traditional medicine was too cautious, too bound by regulations to achieve true breakthroughs. If a few had to suffer for the greater good, wasn't that justifiable? The experiments began at 2 a.m. and continued until dawn. David Walsh, strapped to the first surgical table, could only move his eyes as Elizabeth prepared her experimental leukemia treatment. She had developed a synthetic bone marrow replacement that she believed could cure blood cancers. The procedure involved drilling directly into his femur bones and injecting the compound while monitoring his cellular response. David's screams would have shattered windows if he could have made any sound. The paralytic prevented vocalization, but did nothing to dull the agony as Elizabeth worked with clinical precision. His eyes bulged with pain, tears streaming down his face as she calmly documented his responses. "Fascinating," Elizabeth murmured, watching the monitors. "The synthetic compound is integrating faster than predicted, but triggering unexpected inflammatory responses." For 4 hours, David endured procedures that transformed healing into torture. His body convulsed against the restraints as the experimental treatment poisoned his system, causing organ failure that Elizabeth meticulously recorded. He died as the sun rose, his last sight being Elizabeth's satisfied smile as she completed her notes. Margaret Chen's experimental cancer treatment involved modified viruses designed to target tumor cells. Elizabeth had spent years developing the viral therapy in secret using laboratory animals, and now, finally, human subjects. She injected the viruses directly into Margaret's pancreatic tumor while monitoring the progression through real-time imaging. The viruses proved uncontrollable. Instead of limiting themselves to cancerous tissue, they began consuming Margaret's healthy organs with voracious appetite. Margaret's paralyzed body writhed as the experimental treatment literally devoured her from the inside. Elizabeth watched with scientific fascination, taking detailed notes as her patient died in unimaginable agony. "Viral load appears too aggressive," Elizabeth wrote. "Need to develop better targeting mechanisms for future trials." Robert Torres endured neural regeneration experiments that involved implanting electrodes directly into his brain. Elizabeth believed she could reverse ALS by stimulating nerve regeneration through controlled electrical impulses. For 6 hours, she systematically destroyed and attempted to rebuild his nervous system while he remained conscious and aware. The procedure transformed Robert's mind into a battlefield between electrical stimulation and natural neural pathways. His paralyzed face contorted in silent agony as Elizabeth sent currents through his brain, documenting the results with the detachment of someone conducting research on laboratory rats. Patient after patient, the results followed the same horrific pattern. Elizabeth's revolutionary treatments were killing her subjects faster and more painfully than their original diseases. But she remained convinced that each failure brought her closer to the breakthrough that would justify everything. By 10 a.m., 11 patients were dead. Only Sarah Kim remained alive, though in a vegetative state that was arguably worse than death. Elizabeth's brain tumor treatment had destroyed most of Sarah's cognitive function, while leaving her aware enough to experience her condition. She would spend whatever remained of her life trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her will. Elizabeth spent the next 12 hours eliminating all evidence of her crimes. The bodies were dissolved in industrial acid she had procured months earlier. Medical records were altered with forged entries showing successful patient transfers to Denver General Hospital. The laboratory was cleaned and sealed, its entrance hidden behind false walls and medical supply cabinets. When rescue teams finally reached Cedar Falls 3 days later, they found the clinic empty but undamaged. Dr. Hartwell had vanished into the storm, leaving behind only a handwritten note explaining her heroic evacuation of patients to safety. The story was accepted without question. Local newspapers hailed Elizabeth as a medical saint who had risked everything to save lives. For 18 years, the truth remained buried beneath tons of concrete and carefully constructed lies. In 2003, the abandoned Hartwell Medical Clinic was scheduled for demolition. The building had become a local landmark, its empty windows staring out like dead eyes. Children dared each other to approach it at night, sensing something wrong but unable to articulate the dread that seemed to emanate from its walls. Construction foreman Jake Morrison was operating the hydraulic demolition hammer when something went catastrophically wrong. The machine's steel head broke through what should have been solid basement flooring and continued falling, revealing a hidden space below. Jake shut off the machine, his hands trembling as he grabbed a flashlight. "Tommy, get over here," he called to his assistant. "This ain't right." "There's something down there." When Jake's flashlight beam penetrated the darkness below, it illuminated a sight that would traumatize him for the rest of his life. Surgical tables stained with decades-old blood, medical equipment that looked like instruments of torture, and scattered across the floor, personal belongings that had clearly belonged to human beings, eyeglasses, jewelry, clothing. But the discovery that made Jake vomit was a leather-bound journal sitting open on a desk, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting describing procedures that belonged in a nightmare rather than a medical facility. Subject 7 responds well to neural stimulation, one entry read. Consciousness remains intact despite motor function elimination. Pain responses indicate full sensory awareness preserved, excellent conditions for extended observation. Police arrived within an hour, followed by FBI forensic teams. The hidden laboratory was preserved exactly as Elizabeth had left it nearly 2 decades earlier. DNA analysis confirmed the worst fears, traces of blood and tissue from 12 different individuals, all matching missing persons reports from January 1985. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had murdered her patients in the name of medical advancement. The investigation revealed the scope of Elizabeth's deception. She had been stealing experimental drugs from pharmaceutical companies, purchasing illegal equipment through shell corporations, and systematically targeting vulnerable patients with surgical precision. FBI behavioral analysts profiled her as a highly intelligent psychopath who genuinely believed her crimes served a greater purpose. Agent Sarah Martinez, who led the investigation, would later describe Elizabeth as the most dangerous type of killer, someone who commits evil while convinced they're saving the world. The manhunt for Elizabeth became one of the FBI's most intensive operations, spanning multiple countries and involving international law enforcement. But Elizabeth had planned her disappearance as carefully as she had planned her crimes. In 2019, authorities received a tip from Romania. A whistleblower at a private medical facility reported suspicious activities involving a doctor who matched Elizabeth's description. Dr. Elena Hoffman had been conducting unauthorized experimental procedures on terminal patients, using techniques that mirrored those found in Cedar Falls. When Romanian police raided the facility, they found evidence that Elizabeth had been operating there for over a decade. But once again, she had vanished just ahead of the authorities. Security footage showed her calmly packing equipment and files before disappearing into the night. The Romanian investigation revealed that Elizabeth's techniques had evolved. She had learned to keep subjects alive longer, prolonging their suffering while gathering more comprehensive data. Computer logs showed some experiments lasting weeks, with patients maintained in controlled agony as their bodies were systematically modified and monitored. Most disturbing was evidence that Elizabeth had been training others in her methods. The facility contained teaching materials and instructional videos, suggesting she was building a network of like-minded individuals willing to pursue medical advancement through human torture. Today, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell remains at large. Intelligence reports suggest she may be operating in Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia, countries with less stringent medical oversight. Her victims likely number in the hundreds, each one a stepping stone in her quest for breakthroughs that come at the cost of human suffering. The lot where the Hartwell Medical Clinic once stood remains empty, a patch of grass that locals instinctively avoid. Some claim they can still hear sounds coming from beneath the ground, the echo of screams that were silenced by paralytic drugs, the ghostly whispers of patients whose trust was betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. Sarah Kim's fate remains the case's most haunting mystery. Elizabeth's journal contained references to keeping one subject alive for extended observation and continued experimentation. If Sarah is still alive, she would now be in her 60s, potentially still trapped in the vegetative state that Elizabeth's experiments created, a living victim of medical evil that continues to operate somewhere in the world, hidden behind the trusted facade of healing.